Hello, class. We're going to be starting today. Yeah, so this is the third to last class. I hope everybody's been enjoying. But after this, we have two more classes and then we'll all be done. But yeah, last week Mo went over the homework, so we're just gonna skip this for now. But yeah. So on to the next slide. Today we're going to be going over strings. And I'm sure that you guys have seen strings before, but basically strings are just a sequence of characters. Um, so there's two ways to kind of define strings. You could either use double quotation marks or just a single quotation mark. Hi, Shika. Um, but yeah, they're pretty self-explanatory. Something that's very interesting is that you could have an object string instead of a primitive string. So to make an object, you would do a new string and then wrap the primitive inside the parentheses, and that'll make it an object. So one thing about objects, like why would you use an object rather than a primitive? It's because objects have functions defined already. So for example, um, string object can now call like dot length, but rather string doesn't have like the predefined functions. Important thing to remember though, strings are immutable, so that means that you cannot change their value. The way that JavaScript kind of did this is because that it helps deal with concurrency, which means that in like a very complex piece of code, right? If you have a piece of code changing a string and another piece of code trying to retrieve that string, these kind of like collide and we don't want that, right? Another thing is error reduction. So if you pass in a string into a function and it accidentally changes your string, we also don't want that. So it kind of just prevents errors. This is an example. So right here, we're getting the first letter, which is H. We're trying to change the character to Y, but whenever you console.log, it's still the same because strings are immutable. So how do we actually edit the string? There are a couple of ways. You could slice and concatenate, use like the special classes, or just convert it to array of characters. We're going to be talking about this in the next few slides. So the first way is concatenation. Basically, you just add two different strings together. For example, in this thing, it says my favorite number is, and then you just add the number at the end, and that's just concatenating two different strings. So the output would be my favorite number is 3. Or you could want to access individual characters by using this array syntax. I think Ashika will cover this a little later, but basically an important thing to remember is that the array formatting is 0 indexed, so the first letter will be 0, and then the last letter will be the length -1. And then there's also char at, which is the same rules apply, but it's like a special function in the string object. So looking at this piece of code, what would the output be? Yes, Mo.
Is it JS?
Yeah, perfect. And then what about this? Keep in mind what I said about strings and their properties. Yes, Mo.
It's probably just JavaScript with no changes.
Good. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? No questions? Great. So, but what if we wanted to only print the first 5 characters of the string? Does anybody have any idea on how to do this? Yes, Mo.
String 0, string 1, string 2, string 3, and string 4.
So, but the problem with this is that if you had like 1,000 words, go to the next slide, please. This is like extremely tedious, right? So this is why we need something called substring, which makes this easier. There are two ways of doing this. You could either do string.slice and only have a beginning index, or string.slice with 2 parameters, where the second parameter is the end index. Something to note is that the end index does not include that specific index. So it'll go up all the way until the one before the end index. Also, indexes can be negative, which means that you go to the very end and go backwards. I'll show you an example in the next slide. But also another thing is that you don't have to have parameters, and in that case, it defaults to starting at 0 and goes to the end of the string. So let's practice. What would the first output be?
JavaScript is cool.
Perfect. What about the second one?
Java.
Good. Next.
Um, good. And then it's the five there. So one cool exclamation point.
Good. What about the next one?
Probably JavaScript is cool.
Good. What about the next one?
Mm, Okay, you go to the end, and then you
Okay, the
go.
beginning is -19. I'll just tell you that.
Okay, thank you. So probably, so you start from the beginning, and then you go to -8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. JavaScript.
Good. And then the next one.
JavaScript.
Good. And the next one.
JavaScript is cool.
Perfect. Does anyone have any questions? Ooh, no questions. Perfect. So there's another thing called substring, which is very similar to slice, but substring basically same parameters, right? They're also optional, but negative values are basically treated as 0. And if the beginning index is greater than the end index, they're going to be swapped. So we can see a couple of different examples here. Like before, it's going to be the same thing. The first one, the second one, also the same thing. What
Ooh,
about the
this one's
third
gonna be
one
the same
though?
thing. This one's gonna be the whole string.
Why?
JavaScript is cool because -5 defaults to 0.
Good. What about this next one? It's gonna be the
The
same
whole
thing.
thing.
Yeah. And then what about this one?
They're both just 0, 0, so it's just nothing.
Yeah, perfect. And then in this case,
JavaScript.
yeah. And then the last one.
JavaScript is cool.
Cool. But what if we wanted to find a string within a string? You could use the method index of, which basically returns the first occurrence of a specific character in a string and then -1 if it's not found. For example, in the string hello, if you wanted to do the index of E, what do you guys think what that would print out?
Um, 0,
In the string hello
so,
at the bottom.
oh,
Yeah.
1.
Yeah, perfect. It'll print 1. And then another useful method is two uppercase and two lowercase. This is pretty self-explanatory. Yeah, that's all I have to say for that. So the first one would do hello everybody, or if you go back, yeah, and then the second one would be that. Okay, but oh yeah, okay, got it.
Yeah. Okay, moving on a little bit, just imagine that you want to list for something, right? Like you have a to-do list or a grocery list or anything like that. So if you want a list when you're writing a code, the best way that we store this information is in an array. Do you want chocolate? Okay, we can move on. Yeah, so an array is just an ordered list of values. And in JavaScript, um, something interesting is that the array values and elements can be of any type. Um,
Sorry.
we're going to move it. But yeah, they can be of any type. So they don't all have to be like integers or strings or whatever you can use to match. And the length is not fixed, so it's not immutable like a string. Like you can add stuff to the array and make it longer or shorter. So syntax for making an empty array, let flowers, you have your variable, and then you have the empty brackets. If you want a non-empty array, then you can like fill it with some initial values, like flowers here, and then how you do that, you have, for example, we want strings, so you have this string, and then you have a comma to separate each of the elements. Next slide. Yeah, so if you want to get an item from the array, it's like similar syntax to what we saw before with the strings, but you have the name of the array and then your square brackets and then whatever index of the item you want. And then arrays, like most things in code, are 0 index, so you start with 0 and then you count up. So technically, while like whatever the length of your array is, like in this case flowers is 4, even though it's 4, you can only access up until 3 because it starts at 0. So go 0, 1, 2, 3. And then yeah, if you try and get an access an item at an index that is greater than the max index, it's not 0. And then you can access items also with a loop. And so Basically, like the most common format of this is like you have a for loop, whatever your variable in the like condition is will be your index. So in this case, i's are indexed, and we're going from 0 to flowers.length -1 because it's only a less than symbol. And then so this would just print out aster, daffodil, periwinkle, lilies. Next slide. Okay, like I said before, we can change the length of an array, so you can add stuff to an array and remove stuff from an array. So if you want to add something to the end of the array, you use push, and then if you want to add it to the start of the array, you use unshift. So if we do push peonies, it would be aster, daffodil, periwinkle, lilies, and peonies at the end. And unshift, you add iris at the beginning, so then at the very end, we get iris, aster, daffodil, periwinkle, lilies, and peonies. Oh wait, and then from the last slide, whenever you call these methods, whatever the return value is will be the new length of the array. So you can store that if you need. If you want to remove items from the array, it's very similar. So if you want to do it from the end, you just pop it. And if you want to do it from the beginning, shift it. So they're kind of like the opposite of adding. And then these methods will return the item that they removed. So like flowers.pop will return peonies because that's the last item that's removed. Okay, next slide. Like you have with strings, you can also slice an array. So you can use the slice method to copy part of your array into your array, and it will not modify the original array, so you just have two copies. And so the syntax of that, you have the start index and the end index. And so then like you can see if you do slice 1, 3, it starts at 1, and then it's like strings where like the last number that you have, it'll stop right before that. So since you have 1 to 3, it'll only print 1, 2, and it does not include 3. So if you have less flowers and you slice it to 1, 3, just aster daffodil. Next slide. We can also find items in an array, and how you do that, you have a method to get the index of whatever item you want, and then if the item doesn't exist, you get a -1. And so yeah, you can use index of to find the first occurrence, and then last index of to find the last occurrence. Like for example, in flowers here, we have periwinkle twice. The index of would return oh yeah, okay. Wait. So if you had the other thing with index of is you can add like whatever you want your start index to be. So you can see index of periwinkle 2. It's saying you want to start at index 2, which is daffodil, and then search for the first occurrence of periwinkle, so that would return 3. But if we just did flowers index of periwinkle, then it would return 1, because that's the first, because it defaults to starting at 0. And then the method last index of finds the last occurrence. So if you just do last index of periwinkle, then it will return sense. You can merge arrays together using the concat method, which just stands for concatenate. And the order of that is, so you have one array, you call the concat method on that array, and then the parameter is the second array you want. And so the order will be the array that you call the method on, and then the parameter. So in this case, Jonathan Flowers would come first, and then you have at 10 flowers. But if you flipped it around, you did at 10 flowers dot concat Jonathan Flowers, the order would be switched. And then moving on, we also have number objects in JavaScript. So JavaScript doesn't have any defined number types like int, double, float, bytes, etc. They're all just 64-bit floating numbers, and so you can have all different types. You can have like integers, you can have hexadecimals. They're all the same. Next slide. There's a lot of operations that you can do with numbers and some common like abbreviations. So you don't just have to like type this long thing out, but I do +1 ++, -1 -, plus equal n minus equal n. These are kind of self-explanatory. And then another thing, some like important numbers. Infinity is just a really, really large number. So instead of typing like a billion, you can just write infinity. And then nan is not a number, so it's anything that like can't be defined. Like if you do like square root of -1, that's an imaginary number, it's not a real number, so that would be a nan.
Wouldn't it being only floating point like make some numbers just not accessible? Wait, no. Let's go.
Okay, and then you can incrementing and decrementing, like the plus plus and minus minus that we saw earlier. Where you put the operands matters. So you can either post increment or pre-increment. Post increment is the most common, but what that does is it uses the value of I first and then it increments. So if you see let I equal 0 and then j equals I plus plus, what it will run first is let j equal I, and then it will increment I. So j will just equal 0, and then I will be 1 because it incremented it. And then it's the opposite when you pre-increment. So in this situation, I and j will both be 1 because it did I equals I plus 1 first. Yeah, that. And then you also have math objects in JavaScript, which are like globally defined objects. So you don't need to import it or anything. You can just call it and use it. And then math objects have a bunch of useful constants and methods. We listed a couple here. You can always just like Google them. They're like handy things to have when you're doing that. Move on to the next slide. There's also some useful methods. It doesn't list the parameters you need here, but you can always just do it if you want to know how to use it. Like round, math.round, math.ceil, which gets the ceiling, which is the floor, and then these all interact with integers. We're not going to get a decimal rounding number. For trig functions, you have cosine, sine, tan, arc cosine, arc sine, arc tan, and then they take radian values for arguments. So if you have like a degree, you want to convert it. And then powers and square roots, you have math.pow, math.x for like exponent, and then math.square root. Absolute values is math.abs, I guess the absolute value of the parameter. And then for random numbers, you can call math.random, and it will generate a random number between 0 and less than 1. So 0 inclusive, 1 not inclusive, and it gets you a decimal number. So yeah, like a longest number. Yeah.
Okay, and then for the demo, we're just gonna do something simple today. We're just gonna try to implement these three methods: truncate, capitalize, and swap case. So let's pull up our VS Code. Let me get to the folder. Okay, I need to do this. Okay, here we are. So as always, first things we want to do is make sure that we're pulling in the changes that we have. Most important already added and committed, as you can see. So you just do git checkout main, git fetch upstream, git merge upstream with, oh shoot, it's git merge upstream with main. Merge conflicts. Just accept the income. Okay. And then merge upstream. You know, we can merge upstream. And then, so now we're on week 6. Let's go to week 6. Let's make the demo. Zoom in. Close this a little bit. And then CD, CD 6. There we go. Okay. So first thing we want to do is truncate, which basically with truncate, you take in a string and you take in a number. You want to cut off the last number of the characters and return that new string. So an idea you can do is return string dot slice 0 to the number. I think truncate, you want to cut out the last number. Yeah, this might work. Maybe. Okay, we'll check if this works after. And then go right here, capitalize first letters. This one's a lot simpler for every one of the strings. So let's do a 4 is equal to 0, while I is less than strings dot length. Strings, sorry. Oh yeah. Let I equal 0, strings dot length, I plus plus. And then we can do is let result equals in the new array, and then results dot push equals strings at I at dot slice 1, and then we can do strings at I at 0 dot to uppercase plus this. Now for the same thing, now you just want to swap the case. And usually there's just like a swap case thing. So let's test that out if there, or a dot is uppercase in most languages. So let's check if that exists in JavaScript. Plus plus, just like them, do a normal for loop. And then if string at I dot is uppercase, then it might be a good idea to also just like let output equal we'll make this, no, we can't do a char. Whatever, we'll concatenate it. And then output plus equals string at I dot to lowercase. That. Second, let me check something. Ah, it should be a capital C before we even compile. Sorry, uppercase. Nah, okay. Lowercase. And then just the opposite case. So if it's not lowercase, uppercase, we know it's lowercase. So we can just do output plus equals string at I dot to upper. And then let's see how this does. I'm probably gonna have some errors. Node 6 demo.javascript. String I dot which line is this? Let's see if there's this. That's still not a method. Let's check. Okay, we can do so string at I to uppercase equals string at I in general. And then that should work. Okay. This can be string dot length. Is it? It's just like that. Minus number, I think. Yeah, at least this function works. Now capitalized first letters, we go down. Undefined. Seriously? Ah, you're right. And then down here we need to return as well. Return up. Good. So now push. What the hell is results dot push? Oh my God. There. There we go. So now, as you can see, we have hello world in Java. Basically, for the first function, you take the string and then you slice it from the beginning, and then just string.length gives you the whole string, and then take off the number of characters that the function wants you to take off. For capitalized first letter, you just have let results equal an empty array, and then loop through the array that's passed in, and then push in the first character so that it's uppercase, and then slice off the first character so that people don't see it. And then it's only uppercase first character, and then the rest of the normal word. Again, and then for this one, all you do is check if the current string is uppercase, otherwise make it lowercase, and then vice versa. So, any questions? No questions. All right, let's go back to the slideshow.